There is a woman in a small town in rural Georgia who turns 97 this spring. She tends her own garden every morning, walks a mile before breakfast without assistance, remembers the names of all 31 of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and has not spent a single night in a hospital in over 2 decades. Her neighbors call her an anomaly. Her doctor calls her extraordinary, but she calls herself simply someone who made a decision. One decision that turned into 8 decisions, all before she turned 61. She did not take a miracle supplement. She did not follow some trendy protocol she found on the internet. She stopped doing certain things, and those things she stopped doing changed the trajectory of everything that came after. This is not a story reserved for the genetically lucky or the wealthy. It is the kind of story that researchers at institutions like Harvard, Stanford, and the National Institute on Aging have been chasing for decades, studying people who live past 90 in robust health, trying to reverse engineer what they did differently from everyone else. And what they keep finding over and over is not a list of things these long-lived people added. It is a list of things they quietly eliminated. The woman in Georgia is not alone. She's part of a growing documented pattern of individuals who, somewhere around the age of 60, made a pivot. They stopped certain habits, stopped certain foods, stopped certain patterns of thought and behavior, and the body responded in ways that medicine is only now beginning to fully understand. What is striking about these stories is how ordinary the changes were. Nobody is describing extreme sacrifice or radical transformation. What they describe sounds almost embarrassingly simple in retrospect, which is perhaps why so many people dismiss it or put it off for another year, another decade, another season. The tragedy is not that the information is hidden. The tragedy is that most people have heard it before and done nothing with it. But for the people who actually made those changes at 60, the results compound over time in a way that is hard to describe until you witness a 97-year-old woman doing her own grocery shopping on a Tuesday afternoon. The science behind why 60 is such a pivotal age has to do with how the body changes during that window of life. Muscle mass begins declining at a faster rate. The metabolism slows. The liver processes alcohol and toxins less efficiently. Inflammation, which is one of the primary drivers of almost every major age-related disease, becomes harder to manage. The cardiovascular system becomes more vulnerable to dietary insults it might have survived more easily at 40. What this means is that the habits that seemed manageable or even harmless at 40 can become genuinely dangerous at 65. But it also means that the habits replaced at 60 have an outsized positive impact, because the body is no longer fighting as hard just to survive the ordinary day. Researchers at the New England Centenarian Study, which has followed thousands of people who live past 100 over the course of more than 30 years, found that the lifestyle choices people make in midlife and early old age have a profound and measurable effect on both lifespan and what scientists call health span, which is the number of years a person lives in good health, free from disability and cognitive decline. The centenarians they studied did not just live longer in numerical terms. They lived better, with more independence, clearer minds, and far fewer chronic conditions than their generational peers. And one of the most consistent findings was that these individuals had eliminated specific habits that the general population continues to carry well into old age. The first thing the woman in Georgia stopped was processed food. Not all at once, and not perfectly, but deliberately, consistently, and with a clear understanding of what she was doing and why. She had grown up eating whole foods because that was simply what was available in her community, but by her 50s she had drifted, as most people do, toward convenience. Packaged snacks, frozen meals, canned soups loaded with sodium, crackers that came in cellophane bags with ingredient lists longer than a paragraph. When she stopped, she noticed within 3 months that her joints felt different. The low-grade puffiness she had accepted as a normal part of getting older began to recede. Her sleep improved. Her energy in the mornings, which had been declining for years, came back in a form she had not felt since her 40s. This is exactly what the research predicts. Ultra-processed foods are now tied to a dramatically higher risk of chronic disease across multiple long-term studies. They are engineered to override the body's natural satiety signals, which means people tend to eat more of them than they intend to. They are packed with refined carbohydrates, synthetic additives, excess sodium, and unhealthy fats that create a state of low-grade inflammation throughout the body. Inflammation is the silent driver behind heart disease, type 2 diabetes, cognitive decline, and several forms of illness. For someone over 60, whose inflammatory response is already less regulated than it was at 30, a diet heavy in processed food is essentially adding fuel to a fire that the body is already struggling to contain. The second thing she stopped was added sugar. This was harder, she will tell you, because sugar is not just a food. It is woven into social rituals, celebrations, comfort patterns, and habits that stretch back to childhood. The birthday cakes, the sweet tea, the afternoon cookies that have become a kind of emotional anchor. But the research on sugar and aging is among the most consistent in all of nutritional science. Added sugars drive weight gain and metabolic dysfunction in ways that become increasingly difficult to reverse with age. They promote glycation, a process in which sugar molecules bind to proteins in the body and damage tissue over time. They spike blood sugar levels repeatedly, taxing the pancreas, stressing the cardiovascular system, and disrupting the hormonal balance that governs everything from sleep to mood to immune response. The third thing, which surprised her when she first heard it framed this way, was excessive sitting. She had not thought of sitting as a habit. She had thought of it simply as rest. But research has shown that prolonged sedentary time, independent of whether a person exercises, carries its own set of risks. People who sit for extended, unbroken periods have higher rates of cardiovascular disease, metabolic dysfunction, and even cognitive decline compared to people who move more frequently throughout the day. The human body was not designed to remain stationary for 6, 8, or 10 hours at a stretch. The lymphatic system, which has no pump of its own, relies on movement to circulate. Blood sugar regulation is directly affected by how much a person moves throughout the day. Even standing up and walking for 2 minutes every hour produces measurable metabolic benefits. She did not join a gym. She did not hire a trainer. She started walking every morning and standing more during the day. She began doing what researchers describe as incidental movement, the small acts of physical activity that are built into the texture of daily life rather than cordoned off into a dedicated exercise session. She gardened. She walked to her neighbor's house instead of calling. She took the longer route to the mailbox. Over months and years, this accumulated into something her doctor could measure in her blood panels, her blood pressure readings, and a remarkable stability of her cardiovascular health in her 90s. The fourth thing the woman in Georgia stopped was alcohol. This is often the most contested item on any such list, partly because the cultural conversation around alcohol has been shaped for decades by messaging that emphasize supposed heart benefits of moderate drinking. That narrative has come under significant scientific revision. More recent and more rigorous studies, including research examining brain tissue from people who drank moderately throughout their lives, have found measurable changes in brain structure associated with regular alcohol consumption, even at low levels. For someone over 60, the case for elimination or near total reduction is particularly strong. The liver metabolizes alcohol more slowly with age. Alcohol interferes with sleep architecture, reducing the restorative deep sleep that the brain requires to clear cellular waste products, including the proteins associated with cognitive decline. It raises blood pressure. It interacts with many of the medications commonly prescribed to older adults. It increases the risk of falls, which are one of the leading causes of serious injury in people over 65. She had not been a heavy drinker by any standard. A glass of wine with dinner several nights a week. An occasional celebratory drink. But when she stopped, the quality of her sleep changed within weeks in a way she described as remarkable. She woke up more rested. The mild anxiety she had carried for years softened. Her blood pressure, which had been creeping upward, stabilized. She tells people now that the glass of wine she gave up felt like a small loss at first, and she has lived 18 years since then feeling cleaner, sharper, and better rested than she ever did when she was drinking it. The fifth thing she stopped was chronic stress, or more precisely, she stopped allowing it to live in her body unchallenged. Stress is perhaps the most underestimated accelerant of aging that exists. The physiological response to stress, when it becomes chronic rather than acute, floods the body with cortisol and other stress hormones that suppress immune function, promote inflammation, raise blood pressure, disrupt sleep, accelerate cellular aging at the level of the telomere, and impair cognitive function. People who carry high levels of chronic stress age faster in measurable biological terms. The cells of a chronically stressed 50-year-old can look, under a microscope, more like those of a 65-year-old. The Blue Zones research, which studied populations in Okinawa, Sardinia, Ikaria in Greece, the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, and Loma Linda in California, found that residents in these areas shared consistent stress reduction practices. They prayed, they meditated, they napped, they gathered with friends and family. They had daily rituals for decompression that were treated not as luxuries, but as necessities. She began treating her own mental quiet as something she owed her body. She sat on her porch every evening without her phone and without the television on. She prayed. She kept a journal. She let go of arguments that had no resolution. She stopped attending to other people's emergencies as if they were her own. She became, in the language of her grandchildren, unbotherable, not because she stopped caring, but because she stopped carrying what was not hers to carry. Her doctor notes that her cortisol levels are unusually low for someone her age. Her inflammation markers have remained in a healthy range for years. Researchers studying centenarians consistently find this pattern. The people who live the longest are not the ones who never face hardship. They're the ones who have learned by 60 to process it and release it. The sixth thing was tobacco, which she had stopped in her late 50s after decades of occasional smoking. The evidence on tobacco and longevity is the most unambiguous in all of health science. There is no level of tobacco use that is compatible with optimal aging. Smoking damages the cardiovascular system, accelerates cellular aging, increases the risk of cognitive decline, reduces lung capacity, and is associated with dramatically shorter lifespan. What is less commonly understood is that the benefits of quitting are not limited to young people. Studies on centenarians in China found strong associations between non-smoking status and both cognitive function and longevity. The body begins repairing the damage from tobacco almost immediately after cessation, regardless of age. For those who stop at 60, the body still has time to reverse a meaningful portion of the accumulated damage, and the trajectory of aging from that point forward changes in ways that show up clearly in long-term health data. The seventh thing she stopped was social withdrawal. This one is often overlooked in conversations about longevity because it does not fit neatly into the category of physical health. But the research is unambiguous. Social isolation is one of the most significant risk factors for early decline and early death. Studies examining the health effects of loneliness have found that it increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, immune dysfunction, cognitive decline, and early mortality in ways comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The body experiences social disconnection as a form of threat. It triggers the same stress response systems that activate during physical danger. For older adults, who often face the gradual shrinking of social circle through retirement, relocation, and the loss of friends and spouses, actively maintaining and building community is not a soft lifestyle preference. It is a biological necessity. She made a decision at 60 that she would not allow her world to contract. She joined a community group at her church. She started a small garden collective with 3 neighbors. She made herself the kind of person who showed up, who called, who invited, who remembered. She became the anchor of her social world rather than its passenger. And the returns on that investment have compounded across decades. She has community now at 97. She has people who check on her, who bring her food, who sit on the porch with her in the evenings. Research from the Blue Zones consistently identifies strong social ties as one of the most powerful predictors of longevity, and what her life demonstrates is that those ties do not simply exist, They are built and maintained through choices made over years. The eighth thing she stopped was neglecting her sleep. Sleep had been something she treated as negotiable for much of her adult life, sacrificed to work, to worry, to the demands of raising children, to the television programs that ran late into the night. But at 60, after reading about what sleep actually does in the body, she began protecting it with the same seriousness she gave to her diet and her movement. Sleep is when the body repairs tissue and consolidates memory. It is when the glymphatic system, a network of channels in the brain, flushes out waste products including the amyloid proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease. Chronic sleep deprivation is associated with higher rates of cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, immune dysfunction, and accelerated cognitive aging. Research consistently points to 7 to 8 hours as the range associated with the best health outcomes across most age groups. She began going to bed at a consistent hour. She darkened her room. She removed the television from her bedroom. She stopped drinking caffeinated beverages after noon. She stopped lying awake rehearsing the anxieties of the following day, partly because she had also done the work on stress that made those ruminations less compelling. Her sleep transformed. She began waking naturally before her alarm, feeling genuinely rested. Her memory improved. The mental fog she had started to notice in her late 50s, which she had feared was the beginning of something irreversible, lifted. She has had no diagnosis of cognitive impairment at 97 years old. Her doctor describes her recall and her reasoning as remarkable for any age. What makes her story remarkable is not that she discovered a secret. It is that she took information that is widely available and actually applied it at the age when it matters most. Most people know that processed food is harmful. Most people know that alcohol and tobacco are not helping them. Most people know they should sleep more, move more, stress less, and stay connected. The gap between knowing and doing is where most lives are lost, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, in the accumulation of years spent doing the thing that felt easier in the moment. The pattern she represents is not unique to her. A survey of 100 centenarians conducted in the United States found that nearly half engage in some form of strength activity at least once a week well into their 90s. More than a third participate in regular stress relief practices. A significant number maintain active, robust social lives, attending community events, volunteering, and maintaining close family relationships. The New England Centenarian Study, which has enrolled more than 3,000 participants over its 30-year history, has found that the centenarians they study tend to spend more years of their life in good health than the general population, reaching very old age with fewer chronic diseases and less cognitive impairment. This is not simply a story of living longer. It is a story of living better for longer, which is the version of the story most people actually want. The Blue Zone's research adds another dimension. In every population studied, whether in Okinawa or Sardinia or coastal Greece, the residents did not have sophisticated awareness of nutritional science. They simply lived in a way that their culture and their environment had shaped over generations, and those ways happened to align with what modern research would later confirm as optimal for human health. They moved throughout the day in low-intensity ways. They ate predominantly whole foods, largely plant-based, without overeating. They had a clear sense of purpose that gave their days meaning beyond survival. They had strong communities. They had ways of releasing stress rather than accumulating it. They had strong communities. They had ways of releasing stress rather than accumulating it. And almost universally, they did not smoke, did not drink heavily, and did not sit still for hours at a stretch. They had stumbled into, or been born into, the practices that science is now encoding into formal health recommendations. The body does not close the door on the benefits of positive change at any age. Stopping processed food at 60 produces measurable improvements in inflammation within months. Stopping alcohol at 60 improves sleep and blood pressure within weeks. Increasing daily movement at 60 reduces cardiovascular risk, improves metabolic function, and begins rebuilding muscle within a relatively short period. Quitting tobacco at 60, even after decades of use, initiates a repair process that improves the trajectory of aging for the years that follow. The science of aging is moving rapidly toward a consensus view that genetics, while relevant, accounts for a much smaller share of longevity than was once believed. Most researchers in the field now estimate that lifestyle choices account for the majority of the variation in how people age. Your genes may give you a starting position, but the choices you make from 60 onward do more to determine where you finish than the chromosomes you were born with. This is, depending on how you hold it, either the most empowering piece of information available about human health or the most sobering. It means that most of the people who will not make it past their mid-70s in good health were not inevitable. Their outcomes were shaped, in significant part, by choices that could have been different. The woman in Georgia does not speak about this with any sense of superiority. She speaks about it the way she speaks about most things, with a kind of calm matter-of-factness that is itself, perhaps, the ninth item on the list she never wrote down. She does not catastrophize. She does not spend her mornings reviewing her regrets. She tends her garden, walks her mile, calls her grandchildren, sits on her porch in the evenings, and goes to bed at a reasonable hour. She has done this for nearly 4 decades. She does not find it remarkable, which is, in a way, the most remarkable part of all. The things she stopped doing, she stopped long enough ago that they are simply no longer part of her world. And the world she built in their place is one she inhabits fully, at 97, with clarity and ease. The 8 things she stopped are not a proprietary protocol. They are not trademarked or patented. They are not available for purchase. They are the same 8 things that researchers in Boston and Stanford and Tokyo and Sardinia keep arriving at from different directions, using different methods, studying different populations, and reaching the same place. Stop filling the body with substances and habits that accelerate its deterioration. Start honoring it with the basics that human physiology actually requires. Move, sleep, connect, release, eat real food, and begin, whenever you are reading this, now.